a very modest museum, but it's very important because it has maps, pictures, documentation of the Japanese invasion of East Asia, as well as its treatment of prisoners and people. And I'm told that if this museum were in Tokyo, that they would not be able to stay open, that they would be attacked by the right-wing thug organizations that exist in Japan. Well, Peter was involved in the Smithsonian. I have to remind you, at the Smithsonian Institute, there was a huge scandal in 1995 to have an exhibit on the Enola Gay. They objected to various things that Peter and his people were trying to put into the exhibit, like the lunchbox, the melted lunchbox that you see at Hiroshima. They wouldn't allow that, and they wouldn't allow any. They said it was a disgrace to U.S. veterans. This is the kind of mentality. What we need in the U.S. is a simple museum like in Nagasaki, like the Atomic Museum that I saw there. It explains nuclear weapons, the amounts, the maps, what a nuclear weapon looks like. It shows you the size and the shape of the plutonium bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. It gives a young person a real look into the power of the bomb, and it's a beautiful. We don't even have a nuclear museum in the U.S. As far as I know. Dayton, Ohio, Peter told me there's a museum in Dayton, Ohio, with Boxcar, which is a plane, but there's no knowledge about what nuclear warfare can do. And in reference to American propaganda or television. We live in a world where television would never show this series. The only reason we're on the air was Showtime, because I had a relationship with, and I was able to get it through, took it. They didn't pay for it. We had to finance it. They took it, they played it, they didn't do a lot of advertising. HBO passed, every other cable station passed, and you know, if you're an American, that we would never have gotten this on network television. Never, not in a million years. There's no challenging documentaries. Now, you can say 60 Minutes is all this, gets all the Emmy Awards, but I challenge you, would 60 Minutes ever run this kind of story about Hiroshima or Nagasaki or about any aspect of American history? They'll go into an occasional atrocity, but they never give you that big pattern, that big picture view, because they're pro-American. They depend on pro-American sponsorship. Business interests will not pay, corporations will not pay to be critical of America too much. So we have a real roadblock, and our young people are not getting an education unless they go to other alternate means. We have to provide them that.
The museum that Oliver was referring to in Nagasaki is the Okamasaharu Museum, and we urge all of you to visit it. It's an incredibly eye-opening museum in Nagasaki and is ignored by the city officials. But Japan has an institution very alien to the United States known as peace museums. The United States has one peace museum, a little one, that's also in Dayton, Ohio, but it's not run by the same people who display Boxcar. But we think that's essential. We need those kinds of museums that critically look at American history. And our big institutions, Oliver mentioned the Enola Gay controversy. Some of you remember that in 1995, and that it was censored. The United States had censorship. The United States was not ready in 1995 to do an honest, balanced exhibit on the atomic bombings. What they did instead was a propaganda exhibit. And then in 2003, at the Air and Space Museum Annex near Dulles Airport in Virginia, they opened up this annex and displayed the Enola Gay. And we fought against that. We didn't fight against displaying it. We said it should be displayed, but it has to be done educationally. What do they do instead? They have no information about the dropping of the atomic bomb. They just give some details about the plane itself. You know, the plane is not exceptional. What's exceptional is what that plane did. This is 2003. Supposedly, we're so concerned about weapons of mass destruction. This is a plane that inaugurated the era of weapons of mass destruction, and the United States can't do an educational exhibit, an honest exhibit about that.
Thank you. Have you found the Japanese media receptive to your message about Japanese war atrocities, or have you been detected any censorship or reluctance to embrace the idea?
Well, we've been getting an enormous amount of coverage, very positive coverage from Japanese media, but we see that the Japanese media is much more comfortable explaining, articulating our critique of Hiroshima and Nagasaki because that fits into Japan's victim narrative. They've been less willing to cover our critique of Japan as a victimizer. So yes, the coverage has been positive and extensive, but we want to get this other side of the message out also. The headline in the Nikkei Shimbun, which is important, was that Japan must confront its own untold history. And that's part of it, because America's untold history and Japan's untold history go hand in hand together. They're part of the same process of obfuscating what really happened in the past. So we think that both sides have to come together.
Thank you. Peter, and then, did I see another hand? Peter first, yeah. Yes, please, come up to the microphone. Did I see any other hands from the working press? Okay, Leon, okay.
My name's Peter O'Connor. I'm a historian of propaganda, and I kind of snuck onto the press table.
A little louder, please.
Yeah.
Peter, could you speak into the microphone?
Sorry, my name's Peter O'Connor. I'm a historian of propaganda in East Asia, and I've been asking my students over the years at Worcester University and Musashino University to consider the relative status given to the firebombing of Tokyo, as opposed to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At Hiroshima, it was about 80,000 plus 120,000, and they're still suffering. At Nagasaki, it was about 26,000 and another 40,000 since. And that's debatable. It's as debatable as all figures are. In Tokyo, in the 8 months of the final bombing of Tokyo, the firebombing of Tokyo, it was about 500,000 over 8 months, and 10 million refugees left Tokyo. There's a very small monument to the bombing in Tokyo, and it was put up, during the last 5 years. Whereas there's a, Hiroshima, the mushroom cloud, the lunchbox, whatever, the frozen watch. All of those things have been iconized to a huge extent. Now, I don't see this as a conspiracy any more than I see most Japanese politics and political history as a conspiracy. I don't see people, the oligarchs getting together in the back room, with a blueprint. I think it's a sort of cock-up kind of history, But I would like to see how you see that, because I'm interested.
So how do you see the Tokyo firebombing, the fact that it doesn't get as much attention as Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or anything near as much attention?
I see that as because Tokyo was the second pioneer. Germany was the first pioneer of civilian bombing at Guernica in 1936, and Japan was the second pioneer in Shanghai in 1937. And so Japan was not unique in that, but Japan was unique in being atomic bombed. And so I think that's the reason. But I don't know,
Yeah, I think you can briefly answer that.
Okay. First, I guess I would have different numbers than you have for the casualties in both Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and in Tokyo. But your point, I think, is an interesting and important one. I've been to the firebombing museum in Tokyo, which people should visit because it deals with some of that history. The United States, before the war started, we criticized the inhumane barbarism, Roosevelt did, of the firebombing of cities in Spain and in China. We said this was inhumane barbarism and no people should firebomb civilians. By the time the United States got seriously involved in the Pacific War, our policy was based on firebombing. The bombs loads we dropped were 3/4 incendiaries, designed simply to burn down cities and kill civilians. The American attitude was that there is no such thing as a civilian in Japan, and everybody is a fair target. And Curtis LeMay was the mastermind. He was honest about one thing. This was called terror bombing. It was terrorism. It was state-sponsored terrorism. We're so upset about private terrorism, but this was state-sponsored terrorism, and it's a war crime. And Secretary of War Stimson said to Truman in June of 1945, said, I'm so concerned about the firebombing of cities. He said, I don't want the United States to get the reputation for outdoing Hitler in atrocities. And that was the concern, this barbaric killing of Japanese civilians. And then the Hiroshima bombing. The reason why I think the Hiroshima bombing deserves the prominence that it gets is because Truman understood before the bombs were dropped that he was beginning a process that could end all life on the planet. The firebombing of cities was horrible, but it was not going to end all life on the planet. The nuclear age could. Robert Oppenheimer warned the leaders on May 31st, a couple months before the atomic bombs were dropped, that within 3 years, we're likely going to have bombs 7,000 times as powerful as the Hiroshima bomb. By 1954, Edward Teller was proposing a bomb that the U.S. should develop that was 700,000 times as powerful as the Hiroshima bomb. We began a continuum with the firebombing of Tokyo on March 9th and 10th. We expanded it through the firebombing of cities that had no military relevance during the summer of 1945. 99.5% of the city of Toyama was destroyed. But the other interesting thing about it was the Japanese firebombing of Chinese cities was not raised at the Tokyo tribunals. You know why? Because if that was raised, it would have opened up the door to looking at the American firebombing of Japanese cities and to the American atomic bombing, and many people would have understood the barbarity, which is why Oliver and I say, what if Germany had dropped that bomb first, you know, instead of the United States? How the world would look at this as an act of the ultimate barbarity, and hopefully nuclear weapons would have been eliminated. But instead, the United States dropped them, and nuclear weapons were looked upon as something necessary, and in the United States case, something good and defensible. So I think your point is a valid one. There should be much more attention to the Tokyo firebombing and to the other firebombing. But it doesn't have to be counterposed to the atomic bombing. We've got enough room in our memories and our study of history for both.
Absolutely.
Thank
It's not
you.
neither or.
Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see just gentleman here in the middle, and then Peter down the back, yeah.
Obayashi is my name, freelance. I'd like to ask regarding the foreign policy, President Obama's foreign policy for China, especially on the aspect of they want to build a new empire with huge nuclear power, and also they want to conquer the Pacific Rim. China wants to control all the Pacific Rim, and this is a question for both speakers.
What was your question? Is that a question
I
if they
think the
do?
question
China's-
is directed to us is that China, this gentleman is saying China has got evil intentions to build itself up into a nuclear power, I presume, on the side, and threaten the entire Pacific Rim.
Yes.
And I'm going to let you handle this because we've been talking about this for Japanese journalists for days. I'm exhausted.
This is not Michael Jackson's sex life.
Michael Jackson's sex life.
No, you said Michael Douglas.
Michael
He said both.
Both.
But when he's talking about the time that Michael Jackson and Michael Douglas got together, it's not that well known. But no, this is a serious question, though, and it's central to America's global dominance and position. In November of 2011, Hillary Clinton wrote an article in Foreign Policy magazine titled "America's Pacific Century." What she said is that the United States needs to shift its focus away from the Middle East, away from Iraq and Afghanistan, and focus on Asia. That the United States has got to become the dominant force in Asia. And how do we do this? By pointing out the threat posed by China. They said that she believed, and Obama supports her, and Gates supports her, that we can frighten the Asian people into aligning more closely with the United States. And what did we do? We started increasing our selling of arms to all the Asian countries, including Japan, massive increase in defense spending in Japan as part of the air-sea battle concept, selling fighter jets to Taiwan, selling them to other countries there, increasing our troop deployment, 2,500 more Marines in Australia. We just now announced that we're going to increase our troop presence in the Philippines. The United States policy is going to be to shift from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Right now, it's our naval forces are balanced 50% to 50% Atlantic Pacific. We're going to shift that to 60% in the Pacific. Obama has said, well, we've got to cut back on our military spending because of our budget crisis, but he said it's not going to touch our military spending in Asia because this is essential. So how is the United States seeing this? We're seeing this as the new frontier. We're seeing this as the place where we're going to expand militarily. Joint naval operations with countries throughout the region. Militarizing this conflict. Are there real conflicts and issues in Asia? Yes. Is China acting badly? Yes. Is there a strong nationalist element in China? Absolutely. Should China, and China's policy is in some ways stupid, but China has felt weak and humiliated for a long time. And now they feel that they're becoming the #2 economy in the world, that they're modernizing their military, they're trying to assert themselves, they're feeling their way, and some ways they stumble. But China has not been aggressive like the United States. I mean, Japan can ally with the United States, which has fought war after war after war after war after war after war since World War II. Where has China done that? China has not posed that kind of threat. The United States has an empire of perhaps 1,000 bases. How many bases does China have outside China? 1. So China should change its policies, should not give justification to the militarists in Japan, like Abe, in order to increase Japanese military spending, to get rid of Article 9 and the peace constitution, to increase Japanese forces. Some people even want to develop Japanese nuclear weapons. So we see that all. We see China's policies were critical, partly because it's not solving things as peacefully as it should, and because it's giving provocation to the right-wing leaders in Japan and elsewhere, and is scaring countries to support the American global hegemonic vision for Asia. And we see that as the driving force and the dangerous aspect of this policy.
Peter at the back.
Thank you. Peter Lyon, Australia's Herald Sun. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you on your Untold history. It's a great, great project. Thank you very much. Now, given that you briefly mentioned your evaluation of the Bush administration's 4th term, I was just wondering, have you had any response from the Obama administration regarding your project? What have they said about it? Have they said anything, given their fear of the truth?
I would imagine they've ignored it. I don't know that they've even seen it.
Really?
No, honestly, the United States is a big, big country, and I think, as I told this lady, mainstream media has ignored us. Obama has been, for me, as Peter said earlier, I mean, Bush, those 8 years, those nightmare years, Bush broke the law with the eavesdropping in 2003. He just didn't care about lawyers. He just said, make it up. I don't care what the lawyers do. Just get us, stop these terrorists. And he went to any means necessary. And now with Obama coming in as a constitutional lawyer and a legal scholar, supposedly, he has truly established this method as legal in the minds, and especially of the liberal supporters that supported Obama. He's institutionalized this behavior. It's illegal. We are wiretapping the entire world, essentially, and we can go back and listen to anybody's conversation. We don't have to right now. We can. He's wiretapping the entire world, which is breaking the law. And at the same time, he's saying, well, I have the right to do it because our lawyers say that it's legal, but he won't show us the means by which the lawyers gave him that authority. These are all secrets, the secret method of doing things. This is secret court. This is kangaroo court. He has a FISA is appointed by John Roberts, who's the Chief Justice of the United States. He's a conservative. They appoint mostly prosecutors, mostly Republicans. And they've been appointing them for years, and these guys just basically go ahead and grant the government whatever it wants. Now, yeah, you can argue that there are terrorists out there, absolutely. But I don't know that this method locates them. What really has been locating the terrorist threats as they exist is hardcore intelligence and police work around the world. Intelligence agencies cooperating with each other. We didn't need all these laws. We didn't have to go to this extreme. We had to do what the English and the British, English, the French, the Italians, the Germans have been doing for many years when they fought terrorism in the late part of the 20th century. Good work, hard work, human intelligence. Certain amount of eavesdropping. Yes, it could have been all done. It didn't have to go to this insane degree of overreaction. But Obama, who promised us transparency in government, respect for civil liberties, has violated the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, which may mean nothing to foreigners, but they mean a hell of a lot to me and to people like me. Because, you know, King John, remember him, Robin Hood, the bad king of England, that was all about the Magna Carta. It was about these guys saying, look, we have no right. The king can decide what he wants. He has complete authority over the law. We have no law on our side. The Magna Carta was about finding the right for every man and woman to have the protection of the law. That's what's been violated here. That's what's so angry, makes me so angry and many Americans. Snowden is a hero to me. Edward Snowden is a hero. Because he did this not for profit, not to give give secrets away that could hurt our country, supposedly. I haven't seen one evidence of that. He's doing it out of conscience. The higher law of his conscience has dictated it to him. He sacrificed his life for this. He's on the run now, and all the media, the press, reports him as being an outlaw. That's a simplistic reaction. The truth is, he sacrificed his well-being for the good of us all. We should all be concerned about this. We should all turn on our government. The press is at stake too, as we know. The whistleblowers have been threatened by Obama. There's been 7 cases, I believe, 7 cases of whistleblowing prosecutions. This is a very, very ugly time. This is what Orwell was prescient, but this is Big Brother in a way that Orwell could never foresee. They can see into every home. Obama says, "Well, don't worry about it. We're not listening in." Yeah, but you could listen in, and we know that somebody in the future, if it's not you, it could be Mr. Bush III who comes along, or Miss Hillary Clinton, whatever. Terrorism, it's nonsense. This terrorist band has ruined the world. I mean, the United States has lost its mind. Brzezinski, who we condemn for his policy in Afghanistan, Brzezinski is attacked as being over-ridiculous. The truth is that we have to go back. I don't know how we can go back, but we have to get off this terrorism thing. The problem is that if we go around the world, every public protest, every demonstration against the government, whether it's civil rights, Vietnam War, students against Iraq, these are very important protests. They grow out of the Arab Spring. That's where it comes out of the people. But what is being targeted here is not just terrorists, but those groups. In other words, anybody who protests government policies in the future, whether it's Wall Street bankers, if you protest against them, you're going to be targeted as a potential threat. The Boston Marathon, they were so busy tracking down protesters against green organizations and against various other things that they missed the bombers. It's never about terrorists. It always becomes about the way J. Edgar Hoover did it. He brought all the weight of government to bear on protesters. He didn't like protesters. He thought they were left-wing communists. He never could find the proof, but by the time the Vietnam War came around, as you know, 500,000 people were on the list, and they were being eavesdropped on. Where are we now? Same place. Obama is a snake. He's a snake, and we have to turn on him. I know he likes snakes, but...
First here, and then Hasegawa-san, and then I see a hand up at the back, and then this gentleman here.
Lars Nicolaisen, German press agency DPA. One quick question on Japan. Have you ever thought about doing a similar project on the untold history of Japan? Or if you haven't, have you, or could you think about teaming up with a Japanese director or Japanese historians who would be willing, if there is any, who would be willing to cooperate on such a project?
Well, I would do it if I could. As a producer, I could not devote the same amount of time and loss of money to making such a project in Japan. It would have to be financed by and made by a Japanese, and we would certainly cooperate if called upon, and it was working. It was a workable deal.
Peter, did you want to say anything?
I'm all in. If Oliver's in, I'm in. We'd love to see it. And the longer we're in Japan, every day we're here, we see more of a demand for this on the part of our Japanese friends and colleagues and media. And the more we learn, and the more Oliver and I, this is a learning experience for both of us. We're learning from the hibakusha, we're learning from the journalists, we're learning from the historians, we're reading constantly. Because neither of us was really, I'm an expert in certain aspects of Japanese history, but not the broad view. And Oliver's not an expert in Japanese history. But the more we see, the more we learn, the more troubling it is for us. The more we realize how important Japan's coming to grips with its past is for Japan, but also for the United States and for the rest of the world. Japan and the United States are linked together in this web of deceit, in which we both collaborate to tell lies about all of our history. And Japan and the United States, as the first and the third biggest economies in the world, the first and the fourth biggest militaries in the world, if our countries were doing something good for the world rather than what we have been doing, I think we would make an enormous difference. And we like to see Japan reaching out more to China in a positive way, dealing with the horrible things that the Japanese did to the Chinese in a way that'll start to build some trust and get past the crazy nationalism that we see in both countries.
Hasegawa-san?
My name is Hasegawa from Radio Nikkei. You have found much on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but how did you pay attention to Fukushima nuclear disaster?
Sure. I actually co-wrote a book that deals with the history of Japanese nuclear power. And my perspective on this is really from Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program. Eisenhower wanted the United States to do away with its army in large part and depend on nuclear weapons. When Eisenhower became president in '53, the United States had 1,000 nuclear weapons. When Eisenhower left office, the United States had 30,000 nuclear weapons. Or 23,000. When Eisenhower's budgeting cycle was finished, the United States had 30,000 nuclear weapons. Eisenhower went from nuclear weapons as a last resort to nuclear weapons as a first resort, from one finger on the nuclear button to dozens of fingers on the nuclear button. America's war plan called for 650 million deaths if the United States went to war against the Soviet Union under Eisenhower. But how did Eisenhower sell this to the world? He said, we can't get the world to accept using nuclear weapons unless we can convince them that nuclear power is also a good thing. So he goes before the United Nations, December 1953, and calls for atoms for peace. It was a lie. It was a deception. It was a fraud. If you look at the documents, they say explicitly, we have to do this in order to make nuclear weapons usable. And that was the strategy. And so we decided we were going to push nuclear energy development in Japan in collaboration with Japanese leaders, one of whom was Shoriki, who was a Class A war criminal who was let off by the United States and founds the Yomiuri Shimbun. And he works with the United States and the CIA and the USIA, and we begin to propagandize Japan. It was not easy, especially because Japan was a victim. And then after the Lucky Dragon 5 incident in 1954, the Japanese public was outraged about nuclear weapons. In the next year, literally 1/3 of the entire Japanese population signs petitions against nuclear weapons. So how is the United States going to overcome this? With a concerted propaganda effort. And where did they want to build the first nuclear reactor? In Hiroshima. That's what the United States would hope to do. So the United States pushes Japan to develop nuclear power. And from there, the craziness of a country like Japan that's so earthquake-prone to develop nuclear reactors makes no sense to us at all. Japan should have a very different policy. China is leading the world in terms of solar power. Japan, with its great technological brilliance, should be right there with China. Unfortunately, Japan is instead getting its energy from liquefied natural gas largely from the United States, which comes from fracking, which is a very dangerous process. So there's not necessarily easy answers, but Fukushima was an accident, a disaster waiting to happen, and then what happens there is what happens in every nuclear disaster. Then they lie about it. TEPCO covers up what's really happening, and now we see the horrible environmental consequences, not only the cesium and the other waste being released through the air, but the pouring of massive amounts of radioactive waste into the ocean. There doesn't seem to be a solution that anybody at TEPCO or the Japanese government is coming up with. Maybe Lucy and David have a better understanding of this, but this is a very dangerous situation, and we don't. Abe wants to reopen the rest of the nuclear plants. Right now, only 2 of the 50 plants have been reopened. We think that's a very, very bad idea. We think that Rokasho is a very bad idea, and that Japan should find a way, a different way, to get energy and to have a peaceful kind of development.
Thank you. Okay, I think the gentleman at the back has been waiting for a while. And then this gentleman here at the end. And we're running out of time. We've got 5 minutes. I think we're going to extend for... Okay, 15. So 15 more minutes. All right. So
yep. The question.
Quick as you
Hi,
can.
thank you for your time. It is directed to Director Stone. What do you want people to do with this knowledge? Because do you want like more Snowdens? Do you want revolts? Do you want people to vote out the current administration? Because at the heart of it, at the core of it, government spin. I mean, spin is just part of the whole process. Yeah, I mean, power has always been, that is in their vested interest. So, and so what do you want people to exactly do with this newfound, like, oh, yeah, the government did screw us kind of knowledge? And another thing, do you find that you're fighting a very isolated battle? Because to a certain extent, truth costs money. I mean, you are not beholden to anyone. You can fund this project. But, I mean, do you find that you're fighting an isolated battle to get the truth out? Could you wait for a couple of seconds while I go back?
The perils of working for TV.
I think they wanted you to try.
Yes, I feel very isolated, but every time I go out in public, as I've appeared in many countries and many schools in America too, colleges and high schools, I feel I'm not alone. We're not alone. We made this movie and we've been rewarded in so many ways. Perhaps we'll even make a little profit by the end of the day. With the DVD sales, who knows? It was well worth it. It was perhaps the best film experience I've ever had. In the last 5 years, I've learned more history than I've learned in my previous life. It reinforces my belief that I am doing the right thing with my life. I feel good karma, as they say, as a result of this. It's as if we are warriors for peace. I've been a warrior my whole life, but now I feel more than ever that I'm a warrior for peace. As to your other question, everyone has to take their own. This is a 12-hour, it covers 70 years. Everyone must take away from it what they can take away. Somebody might be more interested in nuclear power. Some people might be interested in Snowden. What you see is a massive abuse of trust in the world. The United States, as I said early when I started, dropped this bomb and innocently told the world that this was the right thing to do. It was not the right thing to do. It was not the right thing to do. It was the wrong thing to do. We are very adamant about that. Anyway, that's why it's so important to stress that point. But the bomb is not the story of the bomb. This is a story of what happens as a result of that pattern. The pattern goes on and on. You see Eisenhower militarizing the United States with bombs and giving nuclear authority to commanders and sub-commanders, which sets up the Dr. Strangelove scenario where John Kennedy all of a sudden in 1962 has to confront the results of John Foster Dulles and Dwight Eisenhower's policy of nuclear brinksmanship come home, nuclear brinksmanship. So there's a great lesson in John Kennedy's behavior of courage. We go into detail with John Kennedy. We talked about it yesterday at the Hayakawa conference. That was a beautiful section they showed of Chapter 6. Kennedy was a great warrior for peace. We go into the Gorbachev section with great love, and we try to show the hope of the world. Gorbachev really was a man who was a colossus of his time. I don't care what they say about him in Russia. We're looking at the big picture. the big picture. And, you know, when we come down to today, we call it the age of terror. We had to finish this thing in January of this year, and we have Bush and Obama as together in one chapter. That's a lot of, that's 13 years of quite a lot of events. So we had to make our choices. We went with that last chapter 10. It sums up Peter and my feelings about what's going on in the world today. We call at the end of this series for magnanimity. We call for generosity of spirit. We talk about soft power. We talk about leaders like Roosevelt, like Wallace, like Kennedy, that did not just talk in terms of hard power, but talked with empathy about the suffering of people around the world, to look at other countries with compassionate eyes, like Henry Wallace did towards the Soviet Union after they'd been devastated by World War II, devastated. You can look at the Soviets and you can see Stalin and tyranny and all this, but you can also look at the Soviets another way. So it's very much important to take, I think, to walk away from the series with a sense of widening compassion, more consciousness about the struggles of other people for their independence. We go into some depth on the Third World Bandung Conference of 1955, how important that was in the middle of the madness that Nasser and Nehru and Sukarno and Tito and came together, the sane people of the world, to say enough of this race to madness. Think about us. We want to have our countries develop without this Cold War politics. And of course, the United States, and not the Soviet Union, the United States takes the lead in taking down most of those leaders, by the way. We have a lot to bear on that. We have a very dirty history with the CIA, very dirty. As effective as the KGB was, the CIA was far more effective, although we always pretended to be the underdogs. Don't forget that when Kennedy ran for office, and always through American history, we are always under threat. The Soviets have more weaponry. There's always a missile gap. The Chinese, as this gentleman is talking about the Chinese like a nuclear monster, but they're not even close to us. With their nuclear capability, nothing compared to ours. We, the United States, have developed, in Chapter 10, we talk about space weaponry that's unbelievably sophisticated. Professor McCoy from Wisconsin talks about drones in space that can be fired by maybe in the next 10 years from 250 miles up that can be so precise to hit an individual target from space. We can talk about scenarios like blowing up countries from space. We talk about cyber warfare. I'm sorry. We talk about cyber warfare. The United States pictures China as this big cyber attacks, and then ironically, of course, we find out that we're the ones. We know that we're the ones who cyber attacked Iran first, but we talk about China as violating everything. Well, this is a mentality that the United States has developed of being the underdog. As a result, perhaps it's a good mentality if you're thinking only about the United States. As a result, we've kind of snuck in. Now we're supposed to be this quiet empire. We're not quiet. We're very loud. And the world has figured this out. And Snowden has figured it out. And the fact that every country, except for 3 or 4 countries, 5 countries, have given him any kind of home, tells you how sick the world has become, how uniform. Where was France when Snowden? Well, France under de Gaulle, would have given him asylum. I believe that Germany should have given him asylum. I was most upset when Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, who followed in the footsteps of Lula in Brazil, Dilma said no right away. Right away. Brazil really let us down. The fact that the whole world is so scared of the United States, so scared. I'm glad China did not arrest him. At least China had the guts to stand up that way, but they did kind of get him out of there. And the Soviet Union, I think Mr. Putin did the right thing, and I'm proud of him for doing that. And we need more countries to stand up to the U.S. The U.S. has to hear no, has to hear defiance. That's what Chavez was good for. He was he kept the regional power. Regional power is a solution. Turkey, Brazil, Venezuela, China, Russia. All these countries. Japan, for Christ's sake. You guys have been asleep. These prime ministers have been asleep for 68 years now. You know, we need the Japan, I'm going to go further, has to disassociate itself from the United States, from the status of force agreements. They've got to get away from the United States nuclear umbrella because they can be a great country again and a real broker for peace in Asia. And by the way, Japan's interests in the long run could very much lie with China. You already are the first trading partner with China. Don't look at China as your enemy. Start seeing it differently. Start by apologizing. Start by apologizing to China for what you did in China and all the people you killed there. Start apologizing for that. And that would go a long way to, all of a sudden the world would say, what? Japan apologized? That would be a shock to the world. They'd make front page headlines everywhere in the world. And it would be a beginning of like what Gorbachev did with the Soviet Union. Hey, we don't want to compete with you. We want peaceful coexistence. What if Japan did that tomorrow? Wow. It would be like a spring, a thaw, a new world beginning. And then China would suddenly look at Japan a little differently instead of hating Japan. That would be the beginning. Thaws. What's your question now? Stop.
So are you saying that you support the militarization of Japan? Because if Japan doesn't need the US, it has to militarize.
No, it doesn't. You're giving a false set of choices, a false set of alternatives. Japan has already militarized. Japan is already the fourth biggest defense spender in the world. What Japan needs is a defensive force. It does not need an aggressive force. There's a lot of pressure now to do away with Article 9, either through Article 96 or other ways to do away with Article 9. What we want to see is Article 9 mean something again. It already hasn't meant very much. But what we're concerned about, if Japan does away with Article 9, it's going to get much more directly involved in America's wars, and Japanese boys are going to be coming home in body bags, the same way that American men and women have been coming home in body bags since World War II, and war after war after war. Is that the future that Japan wants? To be even more intimately involved in America's wars? I don't think so. But there's a couple other points I wanted to just add. In the question he asked, he said, truth costs money. Well, the reality is that untruth costs lives. And that's the choice we have. Yes, truth might cost money, but untruth, the cost that we pay for untruth is a lot more than the cost that we pay for truth. T.S. Eliot asked a very poignant question in his work, Gerontion, and he asked, after such knowledge, what forgiveness? Oliver and I are trying to get that knowledge out there. We see ourselves as involved in a struggle, a monumental struggle, and we need everybody's support in this. And it's a struggle between our enemies have got all the guns, they've got all the weapons, they've got all the bombs, they've got all the bombers, they control the media, they control much of the education. What we've got is the truth. And it's a battle between truth on the one hand and the forces of oppression and militarization and exploitation on the other. We think the truth is very powerful. And we look around the world, and of course we support protests along these lines, but it's more than that. The world, there's a seething unrest all over the world right now. We see it in Greece, where 60% of young people between the ages of 18 and 20 and 30 are unemployed. We saw this in Tunisia. A 26-year-old street vendor was humiliated one time too many, and he burned himself to death. And it sparked an explosion. In Tunisia began the Arab Spring. We saw it in Egypt. We saw it in Turkey. We saw it in Brazil. We're seeing this everywhere. In the United States, we see signs of that. We see that as hopeful. We're trying to give it some sense of history. We see this as the weapon, the history that the Occupy movement and these other movements around the world need to begin to think. But that's why our focus is on history. One of the problems in the United States is that people don't think in utopian terms anymore. They believe that the present is this way and is inevitable. What we're saying is, no, there's nothing inevitable about the world that we've created. That if we were going to start all over as sane human beings, this is not the world we would create. We wouldn't create a world in which the richest 300 people have more wealth than the poorest 3 billion. We wouldn't create a world armed to the teeth, the cyber, I mean, everywhere, the weapons, the space, the military weaponization of space, the surveillance. This is not the world we would create. And we have to show people that it could have been different and that there are ways to think about it differently. And we still have time The world still is here. We still have the ability to make this into a different world. And we hope that our untold history triggers other untold histories, and people around the world see this as a weapon of truth to use against power.
Thank you. With apologies to the people who have their hands up, I'm afraid I'm under strict orders to end. I'm under strict orders to end at 2:10. I'm sorry. Unless you guys can, if you want to say, you can take another question. That's fine. But I've been told to end at 2:10.
One more.
One more. I'm afraid it's this gentleman here. Yeah. So make it a very quick one, if you don't mind.
Michael Galbraith, a freelancer. I'd like to change the subject a little bit. I'd like to ask you whether your untold history offers a new view of how Japan became involved in World War II at the very beginning, and or a new view on the role played by the huge amounts of gold recovered by the American government at the end of World War II. Doesn't some of that gold underwrite the patterns you were talking about? Thank you.
Oh, that sounds like a very complicated answer. Can you direct them to page 65 in the book or something like that? That's Yamashita's gold he's talking about.
The answer very simply to that question is no. It's an untold history of the United States, the American empire, and the national security state. We wrote our U.S. book is 800 pages. We got it to 800 pages after we cut out almost 200 more. We wanted a book that people could lift. And so we had to keep it on a manageable size. Initially, our publisher wanted 275 pages. We fought with them to get up to 800. There are so many stories that we didn't have time to tell, so much history we didn't have time to explore. But we're trying to get at the essential points that we think are central to understanding the American empire, the national security state, the global security state, what's happening now, why the world has gone the direction it has, and what can be done to change it. And that's about as much as we were able to do.
Thank you. Well, thanks to Peter and Oliver for what I thought was a fascinating speech. I'm looking forward to the headline in the Yomiuri tomorrow. Japan and the US linked together in a web of deceit, and then a little box on Shoriki. That would be a hell of a front page on the Yomiuri, if we can get it.
Thank you very much for having us.
Everyone, please stay seated until they leave, okay? Please wait until they leave the room.